The saloon's wooden doors swung open with a thunderous crash, silencing every patron as a disheveled man dragged his struggling sister across the threshold by her wrist. Grace Davis kept her eyes downcast, shame burning her cheeks as her brother Frank's fingers dug painfully into her skin. "How much for the girl?" Frank slurred, pushing Grace forward like cattle at auction. "She's worth at least 3 bottles of your finest whiskey." The year was 1875, and Redemption Creek, Colorado was just another dusty dot on the expanding western frontier. The mining boom had faded, leaving behind desperate men and broken dreams. For 23-year-old Grace, life had deteriorated ever since their parents' passing left her in the care of her older brother, a man consumed by drink and gambling debts. The saloon owner, a portly man with yellowed teeth, eyed Grace with unsettling interest. "Mighty fine looking. Might be worth considering." Grace trembled but refused to cry. She had endured Frank's escalating cruelty for months, selling their parents' belongings, squandering what little money remained, and now this final humiliation. From the corner of the room, a figure rose slowly from a poker table. Tall and broad-shouldered, Flynn Evans cut an imposing silhouette against the dim lantern light. His weather-worn face betrayed little emotion, but his eyes sharp and clear despite the smoky haze narrowed dangerously. "The lady isn't for sale," Flynn stated, his voice carrying a quiet authority that commanded attention more effectively than a shout. Frank whirled around, wobbling slightly. "Mind your business, Cowboy. She's my sister, and I'll do what I please with her." Flynn approached with measured steps, spurs jingling softly against the floorboards. "That's not how it works. Not here, not anywhere." His gaze softened briefly when it met Grace's, noting the fading bruise beneath her right eye. 5 bottles, then," Frank bargained, desperation creeping into his voice. "She's nothing but a burden anyhow." The patrons watched in tense silence. Most knew better than to interfere in another man's affairs, but something in Flynn's demeanor suggested this night would end differently than most. "Let her go," Flynn said, now standing only feet away from the pair. "Or what?" Frank challenged, yanking Grace closer, causing her to wince in pain. The movement was so swift that few saw it coming. Flynn's fist connected with Frank's jaw in a sickening crack that echoed through the silent saloon. Frank crumpled to the floor, releasing his grip on Grace as he fell. "That's what," Flynn answered the unconscious man. Grace stood frozen, staring at her brother's still form, uncertain whether to feel relief or fresh terror at this stranger's intervention. Flynn gently touched her elbow. "Miss, I suggest we leave before he wakes up." I have nowhere to go," Grace admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Years of subordinating her own needs had taught her to expect the worst from others. Flynn hesitated only briefly. "My sister runs a boarding house at the edge of town. She could use help, and you'd have a safe place to stay." When she didn't immediately respond, he added, "No strings attached, Mississippi. Just trying to help." Grace glanced once more at her brother, then to the saloon door, beyond which lay a world both terrifying and full of possibility. "Why would you help me?" Flynn's expression softened momentarily. "Because no one deserves to be treated like property, and because I've seen too much injustice to walk away from more." Something in his honest gaze convinced her. Grace nodded tentatively and followed Flynn toward the door, conscious of the stares following them. "She'll be coming back with her brother," the barkeeper called out warningly. Flynn turned, his hand resting casually near his holster. "No, she won't." The finality in his voice silenced further commentary. Outside, the crisp mountain air felt like freedom against Grace's face. Flynn led her to a handsome chestnut mare tethered outside. "I'm Flynn Evans," he finally introduced himself, offering a hand to help her onto the horse. "Grace Davis," she replied, accepting his assistance with caution born from harsh experience. Flynn mounted behind her, maintaining a respectful distance despite the shared saddle. "Miss Davis, I promise you're safe now." As they rode through the moonlit streets, Grace felt the weight of years slowly beginning to lift. Behind them lay the only life she had known. Ahead stretched an uncertain future, but for the first time in years, uncertainty felt like hope. The boarding house was a modest 2-story structure set back from the main road. Warm light glowed from the windows, and the soft sounds of a piano drifted into the night. Flynn helped Grace dismount, his calloused hands strong yet gentle. My sister Felicity runs this place, he explained, leading her up the wooden steps. She's got a kind heart, though she tries to hide it under a gruff exterior. Felicity Evans proved to be a tall woman with streaks of silver in her dark hair and shrewd eyes that assessed Grace immediately. After a brief explanation from Flynn, she nodded curtly. We've got a room at the back, small but private, and I could use help with the cooking and cleaning, she stated matter-of-factly. Pay isn't much, but includes room and board. Thank you, madam, Grace murmured, fighting back tears of relief. I'm a hard worker. I don't doubt it, Felicity replied. And just so we're clear, no one bothers my girls. This is a respectable establishment. She shot Flynn a look that suggested he should be on his way. Flynn tipped his hat. I'll check in tomorrow, Miss Davis. Rest well. After he left, Felicity showed Grace to a small but clean room with a narrow bed and simple furnishings, more privacy than she'd had in years. Once alone, Grace finally allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of having narrowly escaped a terrible fate. Morning arrived with the scent of fresh coffee and baking bread. Grace found Felicity in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up as she kneaded dough. There's an apron on the hook, Felicity said without looking up. Breakfast needs serving in 20 minutes. Grace quickly adapted to the boarding house routine. The work was demanding but satisfying, and the boarders, mostly respectable working men, treated her with more courtesy than she'd experienced in years. Each evening, she collapsed into her bed, exhausted but secure. 3 days passed before Flynn returned. Grace was sweeping the front porch when he appeared, hat in hand. Miss Davis, he greeted her. You're looking well. She was. Regular meals and uninterrupted sleep had brought color back to her cheeks. She had borrowed a dress from Felicity that, though a bit large, was clean and whole. Mr. Evans, she acknowledged, painfully aware of her debt to him. I'm grateful for your help the other night. How are you settling in? He asked, genuine concern in his voice. Your sister is a fair employer. I'm fortunate. Grace hesitated before asking the question that had troubled her sleep. Have you seen Frank since? Flynn's expression hardened slightly. He left town on the morning stage. Made quite a scene at the depot, threatening to return. He saw her fear and added quickly, don't worry. Sheriff Turner made it clear he wasn't welcome back. Relief washed over Grace, followed immediately by guilt. He's still my brother. Blood doesn't excuse cruelty, Flynn said quietly. Some ties need breaking to allow new ones to form. Their conversation was interrupted by Felicity, calling from inside. Grace excused herself, feeling Flynn's gaze following her retreat. Over the following weeks, Flynn's visits became regular occurrences. He brought small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, items that held meaning rather than monetary value. Grace found herself watching for him from the windows, heart quickening at the sight of his tall figure approaching. Felicity noticed, of course. My brother's sweet on you, she remarked bluntly one evening as they prepared supper. Never seen him like this over any woman. Grace blushed deeply. He feels responsible for me, that's all. Felicity snorted. Flynn's helped plenty of folks without bringing them posies afterward. She studied Grace's expression. Unless his attention's unwelcome? No, Grace admitted softly. It's not unwelcome at all. Summer progressed into early autumn, bringing crisp mornings and golden afternoons. Flynn began inviting Grace on Sunday rides, carefully chaperoned by either Felicity or another respectable woman from town. During these outings, Grace discovered Flynn's history, orphaned young, raised by an uncle who taught him ranching, now working towards saving enough to buy his own land. I've got my eye on a parcel west of here, he told her during one ride. Good water, decent grazing. Nothing fancy, but a man could build something worthwhile there. Grace found herself picturing such a life, a modest home filled with children's laughter, meals shared at a sturdy table, the security of honest work and mutual respect. Such dreams had seemed impossible just months ago. In turn, she shared her own past, a happy childhood ended by her mother's illness, her father's subsequent decline, and Frank's transformation from protective brother to bitter tyrant. I should have left sooner, she confessed. But where would I have gone? Unmarried women have few options. You showed courage that night, Flynn argued. Sometimes the bravest act is surviving until opportunity arrives. As autumn deepened, rumors reached Redemption Creek that Frank Davis had been seen in neighboring towns, drinking heavily and boasting of settling scores. Though Flynn assured Grace she was safe, she noticed he began wearing his sidearm more visibly when in town. Tension mounted when a letter arrived for Grace, delivered to the boarding house by a traveling salesman. Frank's erratic handwriting demanded she return to her proper place and threatened consequences for her kidnapper. Grace's hands trembled as she read his accusations and vitriol. "He'll never change," she told Flynn that evening, showing him the letter. "As long as he's out there, I'll never truly be free." Flynn's jaw tightened as he read. "You're not property to be claimed. You're a woman with the right to choose your own path." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a deepening of feeling that transcended their cautious friendship. That night, as Grace prepared for bed, she heard raised voices from downstairs. She crept to the top of the stairs to find Flynn and Felicity in heated discussion. "You can't just go after him," Felicity insisted. "That's vigilante justice, and you're better than that." "I'm not hunting him down," Flynn replied, "but I won't let him threaten her. She deserves peace." "And what about your peace?" Felicity challenged. "You've worked years toward that ranch. One wrong move could jeopardize everything." Grace stepped into view. "I won't be the cause of trouble between you." Both siblings turned, startled by her presence. "You're not trouble," Flynn stated firmly. "You're worth protecting." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken emotion. Grace felt something in her heart unlock a capacity for trust she thought had been permanently damaged by Frank's betrayal. "Then we face this together," she said with newfound resolution. "I won't hide from him anymore." The confrontation came sooner than expected. The following Saturday, while Grace was shopping for supplies in town, a rough hand grabbed her arm, yanking her into the narrow alley between the general store and the barber shop. "Thought you'd escaped me, didn't you?" Frank snarled, alcohol fumes overwhelming his breath. His once handsome face was haggard, his clothes filthy. "That cowboy made me a laughingstock. Time to come home, sister dear." Grace pulled back, surprised by her own lack of fear. "I am home, Frank. This is my life now." Frank's grip tightened painfully. "You ungrateful, let her go." Flynn's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. He stood at the alley entrance, blocking the escape route, his expression dangerously calm. Frank laughed bitterly. "Here's your hero again. Man can't mind his own business." "She is my business," Flynn replied evenly. "Walk away, Davis. Last chance." Instead, Frank shoved Grace aside and lunged toward Flynn with a wild haymaker. Flynn sidestepped easily, landing a precise blow to Frank's midsection that doubled him over. The fight was brief and decisive, Frank's drunken rage no match for Flynn's disciplined strength. As Frank lay groaning in the dirt, Sheriff Turner arrived, drawn by the commotion. "What's the situation, Evans?" "This man assaulted Miss Davis," Flynn explained, helping Grace to her feet. "He's been warned to stay away from town." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Jail's got a vacancy. He can sleep it off there while we decide what to do with him." As Frank was led away, hurling curses and threats, Flynn turned to Grace. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, then impulsively wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. Flynn hesitated only briefly before returning the embrace, his heartbeat strong against her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for today, but for showing me what a good man looks like." Flynn gently tilted her face up. "Grace Davis, you've shown me what courage looks like." His gaze dropped briefly to her lips before he stepped back, ever mindful of propriety in the public street. That evening, the boarding house hosted a small gathering to celebrate one of the boarders' birthdays. Amid the piano music and friendly conversation, Flynn found a moment to draw Grace onto the back porch, away from curious eyes. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "about what happens next." Grace's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" "Your brother will be escorted to the territorial border tomorrow, with instructions not to return. You're truly free now." Flynn took a deep breath. "And I find myself hoping you'll choose to stay in Redemption Creek. For good reasons, not just because you have nowhere else to go." Grace studied his earnest face in the soft lamplight spilling from the windows. "What reasons might those be, Mr. Evans?" Flynn took her hand carefully in his. "Because in these past months, you've become the most important person in my life. Because I find myself thinking of you first thing each morning and last thing each night. His voice dropped lower. Because I've fallen in love with you, Grace Davis, and I'm hoping beyond hope that you might someday feel the same. Joy bloomed in Grace's chest, so intense it was almost painful. Not someday, she whispered. Already. The kiss that followed was gentle, yet filled with promise, the first chapter of a new story rather than the conclusion of the old. Sheriff Turner made good on his word, personally escorting Frank to the stagecoach the following day. Before departing, Frank requested a final word with his sister. Under Flynn's watchful eye, Grace agreed to a brief meeting at the sheriff's office. Frank, sober and subdued, barely resembled the monster of her recent nightmares. I'm not going to apologize, he began gruffly. But I'm not coming back, either. Found work at a lumber camp up north. Grace nodded, maintaining a careful distance. I hope you find some peace there, Frank. You were always the better one of us, he muttered, avoiding her eyes. Tell your cowboy he's got a good right hook. It was as close to acceptance as Frank could manage. As fall gave way to winter, Grace flourished in her independence. She continued working for Felicity, but also began teaching reading lessons to several town children whose families paid her in eggs, preserves, and occasional coins. The small savings she accumulated represented freedom unlike any she'd known before. Flynn's courtship proceeded with respectful deliberation. They attended church socials together, shared Sunday dinners at the boarding house, and exchanged letters even though they saw each other almost daily, Flynn pouring onto paper the deeper feelings he sometimes struggled to express aloud. By Christmas, the entire town recognized them as a committed couple. Flynn presented Grace with a small wooden box he'd carved himself, containing a simple silver band. Not an engagement ring, he explained as her eyes widened. Not yet. But a promise that when I ask, it will be because we both choose it freely, not from necessity or gratitude. Grace slipped the ring onto her right hand. When you ask, my answer will be yes. The harsh Colorado winter provided ample opportunity for contemplation. Flynn worked tirelessly, taking extra jobs breaking horses and guiding supply wagons to remote settlements. Each dollar brought him closer to securing the land he coveted. Grace, too, planned carefully. She expanded her reading classes and began assisting the town's seamstress, developing skills that could provide independent income. The woman she saw in the mirror each morning, confident, purposeful, hopeful, bore little resemblance to the frightened creature who had entered Redemption Creek less than a year before. Spring arrived with renewal, both literal and symbolic. The mountain snowmelt fed rushing streams, wildflowers carpeted the valleys, and Flynn completed the purchase of his ranch property. The modest cabin needed extensive repairs, but the land itself was everything he had described: fertile, well-watered, with views that stole the breath. On a perfect May afternoon, Flynn brought Grace to see what would become their home. They rode together on his chestnut mare, crossing a meadow dotted with blue columbines and golden sunflowers. It's beautiful, Grace breathed as they dismounted near a gnarled apple tree that somehow survived at this elevation. Flynn watched her expression with undisguised tenderness. It still needs work, lots of it. The cabin roof leaks, the corral needs rebuilding, and the garden plot is overrun with weeds. Sounds like a good life's work, she replied, imagining future harvests and celebrations in this place. Flynn took both her hands in his. Grace Davis, I'm asking properly now. Will you marry me? Not because you need protection or because I saved you, but because we've saved each other in all the ways that truly matter. Grace's smile rivaled the spring sunshine. Yes, Flynn Evans. I'll marry you because I choose you, today and every day hereafter. Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in Redemption Creek's small church. Felicity stood as Grace's witness, beaming with uncharacteristic emotion as her brother spoke his vows in a voice steady with conviction. Grace wore a new dress of soft blue cotton, her hair adorned with wildflowers rather than expensive jewels. I promise to honor your strength, Flynn vowed, to cherish your independence even as we build a life of interdependence, and to remember always that you are not mine to possess, but mine to cherish. Grace's own promises acknowledged their unusual beginning. I vow to trust the future we create together, to remember that love exists in actions as well as words, and to be your partner in all endeavors, great and small. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. The town that had witnessed Grace's lowest moment now celebrated her happiness with genuine warmth. Even the bartender who had considered her brother's offer now raised a glass to the couple's future. Their first night as husband and wife was spent in the boarding house, in a special room Felicity had prepared. Grace approached this final threshold with mingled anticipation and nervousness, but Flynn's gentle patience transformed uncertainty into discovery. In his arms, she found that physical love could be as tender and respectful as their courtship had been. The following day, they departed for their new home, waving goodbye to Felicity and the life that had brought them together. The cabin welcomed them with rustic simplicity, a single large room with a stone fireplace, sturdy handmade furniture, and windows that captured mountain vistas in every direction. "It's not much," Flynn apologized as he carried their trunks inside. Grace turned slowly, absorbing every detail. "It's everything," she corrected him, "because it's ours by choice." The years that followed fulfilled the promise of that beginning. Flynn and Grace worked side by side to transform the property into a thriving small ranch. They added rooms to the cabin as their family grew, first a daughter with her father's quiet determination, then twin boys who approached life with their mother's newfound confidence. Redemption Creek prospered as the railroad finally reached the area, bringing new opportunities and connecting the once isolated town to wider markets. Felicity eventually sold the boarding house and moved closer to her brother's family, building a small cottage where she maintained fierce independence while enjoying the company of her niece and nephews. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Flynn surprised Grace with a journey back to where their story began, the saloon, now transformed into a respectable hotel with a restaurant on the main floor. "Remember that night?" he asked as they shared a private dinner. Grace nodded, the memory no longer painful. "I thought you were just another man trying to claim me." Flynn reached across the table to touch the silver wedding band that had replaced his promise ring. "And now I know you never wanted to own me," she answered, lacing her fingers with his. "You wanted to see me own myself." Outside the window, Redemption Creek's main street bustled with activity wagons delivering goods, children playing, women and men going about their business with purpose. Grace realized that the town's name had proven prophetic in her life. What had begun with a desperate bargain and a whiskey-fueled confrontation had indeed led to redemption, not through dramatic rescue alone, but through the patient building of a life based on mutual respect. Later that night, as they lay together in the hotel room, Flynn traced the contours of her face in the moonlight. "Any regrets?" he asked. Grace considered the question honestly. "Only that I didn't find the courage to leave sooner. But then, we might never have met." "I'd have found you," Flynn assured her with absolute certainty. "Some souls are meant to find each other, no matter the circumstances." Grace smiled at his unexpected romanticism. "My practical, steady cowboy, talking of souls and destiny?" "You've changed me," he admitted. "Shown me that strength isn't just in protecting others, but in helping them protect themselves." As she drifted toward sleep in his arms, Grace reflected on the journey from that desperate night to this peaceful moment. From being offered for whiskey to being cherished beyond measure. From living in fear to building a life of purpose. The contrast was so profound that it sometimes felt like a dream. But Flynn's heartbeat beneath her cheek was real. The children sleeping at home under their aunt's watchful eye were real. The life they had built together, planting and harvesting, celebrating and grieving, loving and growing, all of it gloriously, undeniably real. The whiskey deal that had never been completed had instead uncovered something far more valuable. The discovery that true love wasn't about possession or rescue, but about recognizing another's worth and choosing to walk beside them through whatever lay ahead. In the end, it wasn't the punch that had saved Grace, but the respect that followed the daily decision to see her not as property to be traded or protected, but as a person whose freedom was essential to genuine love. And in that freedom, she had found not just safety, but joy.